Ultimate Juggernaut is from the Ultimate Universe, Earth 1610. So a little breakdown about this character. So unlike his Earth 616 counterpart, K Marco, the Ultimate Universe version, is not empowered by the mythical Crimson Gem of Sitarak. A little bit different, a little bit, more along the whole mutant aesthetic, I suppose. His powers come from genetic enhancements via the Weapon X program. If you don't know, they're the evil government corporation that experimented on Wolverine and turned him into Weapon X. In this universe, he's worked alongside the X-Men, and he is a very morally grey character, mostly leaning towards a villain, but kind of falling into that Deadpool territory because it is a Weapon X scenario, which makes him more of a mercenary, I suppose. This version that I've done is pulled from one comic image, and that's it.
Unstoppable!
Juggernaut! The ripped, tattered combat trousers, the big, heavy boots, and, topless with metal bracketed, almost Cyclops appearance. So I could have went about this custom in several ways, but I'm constantly trying to increase my painting ability, my sculpting ability, my engineering. Whatever it is, every custom is a new challenge, right? And I want it to be challenging in some area. This one, I wanted to really stretch my skills when it comes to paint applications. So that's exactly what I did. I wanted it to be cell shaded. And painting this way kind of allows you to diagnose all the different coloring that are in those panels. And just from like the flesh shade alone, there's probably about 7 different colors. And then they're all overlaid with like black lining from pen markers. That's what it looks like anyway, like sketch scratches. I really love this style. Now don't get me wrong, it wouldn't work on every single custom that I ever make, but it is really, really enjoyable to do. You may also be thinking, God, you just did a Juggernaut and now you're doing another Juggernaut? Do you really enjoy that character? It's not necessarily like that. If you've been watching my YouTube channel for a long time or follow me on Instagram, I'm very fanatical when it comes to reaching a certain level of perfection. I know that sounds quite obsessive, but if I fail, I have a ton of motivation to want to do it again and again and again until I succeed. So with the stormcollectibles Juggernaut, I felt like that was a write-off. That was a bit of a failure. It was a great stepping stone, and I educated myself heavily from its experience, but ultimately it was a letdown and a write-off. So I thought, right, well, I'd like to do Juggernaut again, but let's mix it up a bit. Let's use a recipe that I thought of ages ago. If you check my shorts, I threw it up a while ago, probably last year or the year before. It was just a Juggernaut head on a Hulk, Marvel Select Hulk. So I was like, okay, I'll try this. Less is more. Keep it simplistic. So I took that approach, but I really don't like the Marvel Select articulation. It's lacking heavily. So I went in and modified the joints with stormcollectibles joints. And now he's got a lot more range. It feels better in the hand, it flows when it comes to the articulation. I think a lot of the times my biggest disappointment when it comes to action figures is the articulation. Getting a big beefy character and then it not really being able to move too much is kind of frustrating. Especially Juggernaut. Juggernaut's one of those characters where he's very mobile, so having him have reduced articulation that the Marvel Select kind of provides isn't the greatest, but I do show off the articulation coming up very soon, and he has way more range just from that torso articulation modification. It's a drastic difference, dude. And don't get me wrong, there still are clunky areas like the shoulders. They're limited to whatever the Marvel Select is. And what it is isn't that great, unfortunately. It's the same for the biceps, even though I got in there and dremeled them all out. I didn't mess with the shoulders. Now, I probably should have. I probably should have added the storm articulation in that as well. The socketed joints, the smooth, buttery smooth, may I add, articulation points. That would have been fantastic. It was tempting, but again, less is more, guys. Less is more. When you overload yourself with these huge projects, it can be huge burnout. And the burnout is the worst thing to occur for me personally lately, is if I burn out, that's it, bro. Like, dude, you could be talking 6 weeks, you could be talking 6 months of me just having this, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm not feeling it, it's not enjoyable, and I try to stay away from that as much as physically possible. One thing for me personally, when it comes to burnout, is hands. I don't know what it is about hands doing extra sets, buggers me up. Dude, it burns me out so hard. It's always the last thing that I do, and man, it hits like a train. It's like, boom, you no longer want to do this project. I don't know what it is about hands, but I had to have them because I did the previous Juggernaut and it annoyed me that it didn't have the open hands. So this time round, I had to do it. And I'm glad I did, because it's far more enjoyable when articulating and playing with the figure and so on and so forth. And I feel like he looks a lot better with the open hands, but having him being able to take better photos and pose up a little bit differently is quite nice. The wrist guards are from the previous Juggernaut that I did, so I kind of salvaged those, modified them a little bit, painted them up, made them accurate to that comic book panel again, using that as full reference and not diverting at all. I just wanted it to be exactly as it could be. The legs were modified heavily, so it's got way more range. They were taken from a McFarlane Bane, because I had one of those laying around. That figure is basically a statue, but the lower legs are actually quite nice. So I stripped those away and resculpted all of it and spliced this and cut that and reshaped this, and they worked out really well. The Select Hulk always has some sort of growing pain. Unfortunately, this time it was the gapping in the legs, so I've had to Dremel these right down and create another hole for the peg itself, because this is how they were sitting before. And that obviously looks absolutely ridiculous. And this is how they sit now. Flush to the body with no silly gapping. So the legs are the only real thing that gave me a bit of difficulty. I didn't want them to look elongated. Everything else was pretty straightforward and very easy. There's a little bit of prep in the legs because of the difficulties with the modification, but other than that, everywhere else isn't prepped. Why? Because Marvel Selects absorb the paint that I use incredibly well. If you'd like to know what types of paints I use, there is a Patreon link at the description below. Also, the sealers I use greatly increase the durability. Again, on my Patreon, gold tier, check it out. The emphasis on results speak for themselves. This figure is not prepped, you just saw me throw it around in real time. I just put it into a pose, a running pose. Again, his articulation is stable and sturdy due to its modification. Stormcollectibles joints, he's got the McFarlane feet. He is a hefty figure. He weighs a fair amount. He's a lot larger than the Marvel Select due to those modifications, yet he's still stable and still able to maintain this running pose. One of my favorite customs, this one for sure. This guy was a made to sell, and he sold over on Patreon as a Patreon exclusive. If you weren't a Patreon member, you weren't able to obtain this guy, unfortunately, and there is a lot of sales that go through Patreon far before, you know, this release. I mean, this custom now is over 6 months old, so you gotta remember that everything's being made over there months and months and sometimes even years in advance. And if you're thinking to yourself, oh man, I'd love to have a commission, I'd love to own my own Juggernaut, I'll get Symbiote Seeker to make one, no problem, man. Hit me up via Instagram or Patreon. Please, 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 please don't message me unless you're 100% committed. They are incredibly time consuming. They take me around 1 to 2 years to complete. Also, price. They are very, very expensive. Please keep that in mind. But if you'd like to support me in other ways, there is always Patreon. The Patreon members, my community, you guys are phenomenal. I can't say that enough. Thank you. And thanks for watching the video. I'll catch you on the next one.